Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and finally got a chance to sit down and play with this Lawn Fawn Love Ya Bunches stamp set that I showed in a haul not too long ago. This set is exclusive to Ellen Hutson. I'd mentioned that in the video. It is a collaboration that she is doing with different companies. So the only way to get this is through Ellen Hutson, and it comes as the set with the dies. I'll have a link to it in the description box below the video, as well as on my blog, and then the info is with that. So I had pre-stamped a whole bunch of the images onto some Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock, and I'd stamped them all with Hero Arts Intense Black ink, which is a Copic friendly ink. And then before I started filming, I colored in everything, but all but one of each of the images, just so that I wasn't spending a ton of time filming and having even more footage to go through. So I just colored all these monkeys really simply. I used 3 different Copic markers. I just used E35, E34, and E31. Colored all of them in. And then I'd stamped a bunch of the leaves. I save all my scraps of my Neenah, well, all my cardstock, but especially the Neenah, because it's a little bit harder to get, it's a little bit more expensive, but small pieces are perfect for smaller images. So I had all these scraps of cardstock, so I just decided to use them all up and stamp all these images multiple times. Plus I was thinking, I'm like, you know what, I could probably get at least 2 cards. I had a rough idea in my head of what I wanted to make, but I wasn't totally sure, so I stamped a ton. So with the leaves and these vines, I did the same thing. I just used 3 Copic markers to color them all in, starting with my darkest and working my way to my lightest. Generally, when coloring with Copics, people start with their lightest and work their way to the darkest and back. I've just found in the last couple of years, I tend to more often than not go from darkest to lightest. It's a convenience thing. It's less blending. So after the vines, I went on to the bananas, and funny thing is that for the bananas, I used more colors than everything else. But I used 3 different shades of yellow, and then decided to add, little spots of brown with my E35 markers. So just colored in all the peels of the bananas, basically, and again, darkest to lightest. And then once I had those blended out, I just lightly dabbed on that E35 here and there, just to give it those little brown spots. And then once I had that, I used my Y000, just add a little bit of yellow to the open bananas and to the open areas of the peels, just to give it a little bit of color, but it's still mostly white with that. So after I had all of my coloring done, I used the coordinating die set, which I had cut apart again before filming. And I'm just taping them into place over the coordinating images with some micropore tape so that I can die cut all of these at once. So this is going to be quite a bit of die cutting, but it's still a lot faster. If I went and fussy cut all these images, I would have been here forever. So I just lined up all of the dies over the coordinating images, taped them into place with that micropore tape, and then I can fit all 3 pieces onto my die cut platform, run it through my Big Shot. And I'm just going to repeat this step over and over again until everything's completely die cut. So other than the leaves, it actually didn't take long to die cut these. The leaves, I kept going back and forth until I had them all die cut. And then as an afterthought, I decided to use my white, Uni-ball white gel pen to add, the little white highlights and little detail. Normally, I would have done this before die cutting because it would have been faster, so I wouldn't have had to hold the images or anything, but like I said, it was an afterthought. So I just went along and added just little white highlights here and there to all the little images. It just makes everything pop just that little bit more. So after I had all of my images die cut, I'm going to create my first card. And I decided I wanted to make a scene using several different Lawn Fawn sets. So this is the Leafy Tree Backdrop Portrait die, and I die cut it first from some dark brown cardstock, and then I die cut it again from some white cardstock, and I just trimmed off the tree so I just had the border. And I'm going to adhere that to the brown cardstock. So I'm just using a thin line of my Nouveau adhesive, and I'm going to adhere that right on top. So I've got a white border, and then I've got the brown tree, and then the green piece is technically the backdrop for the top of the tree there. but I wanted to use it as a hill to have like my little characters on. And then I also used my Spring Showers Lawn Fawn die set, and I die cut a sun from some Sunshine cardstock, rather apt name for it, and then lined that up where I wanted it, and then added just little dabs of glue there to the rays, so I can just put the frame right on top and adhere that into place. I could have cut my background and done it all, like adhered it to that, but I want to adhere all this to just the card base itself. I thought it would kind of eliminate a little bit of bulk. So I'm just going to kind of adhere as much of this as possible before actually adhering this to my card base. So for the sentiment, I wasn't sure. Like I said, I was just kind of going along as I'm creating this. I just like film while I create half the time. And I wanted to stamp the sentiment. I was thinking about stamping it directly on the hill, but instead I decided to stamp it on just a separate piece of cardstock that I had die cut with one of the smallest of the extra sentiment banner set. And like everything else, I will have links to everything in the description box below the video, as well as on my blog. So I inked up a sentiment from that Love Ya Bunches set and stamped it with that same intense black ink onto that little banner. And then I'm going to adhere my little hill into place here. Just get that going in the corner. And then the sentiment banner, I'm just going to adhere with foam tape in a minute. But my card base is some Summer Splash cardstock. All this cardstock is MFT cardstock. I just thought the fun colors would be perfect to create my little scene. So I'm going to adhere the clouds to the card base since they're more in the background. Just going to figure out where I want to put them, and then I can adhere them flat to the card base before I adhere this entire scene. And this leafy tree backdrop die is A2 sized. It's 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. That's also why I kind of did it separately, because it's so big that it will cover the entire front of an A2 size card. So now that I've got my clouds in place, I can adhere this into place right over the card base, and you can see it goes all the way to the edges here, because this is a top folding A2 size card. So I adhered my entire background, so I've got my scene going, and now I can start adding all these other elements. So I'm going to adhere the sentiment with some foam tape, and I just pulled out my little Derice foam strips because I knew I was going to want to pop up several of the elements with these, and they're small enough that they're easy to quickly cut down. So I adhered my sentiment first, and then I start figuring out where I'm going to put like all these little monkeys and leaves and bananas and all that fun stuff. So I thought of hanging a little monkey from the branch, and I started popping things up with foam tape. So just popping in all these little characters to make my scene. So all the monkeys I popped up with foam tape just for that extra bit of dimension. And then it was an afterthought. I forgot that I had those vines, so I was like, crap, but I was able to like slip that right under his tail. And then I just popped little tiny pieces of foam tape behind each little leaf cluster there to pop that into place. And then with the leafy tree backdrop dies, there's 2 different die sets. There's the portrait and the landscape ones. I forget yet until I go and look at my supplies which leaf die this is, but I die cut it from 2 different colors of green cardstock, and I just went around and just added some die cut leaves, you know, from the solid cardstock, as well as the ones that I had stamped and colored. So I'm just picking them up with my tweezers, adding a little bit of adhesive, and then pressing them into place to kind of fill in the top of this tree. And then once I was kind of happy with how many leaves I had, I'm going to adhere those clusters of bananas. I added, you know, a banana to each of their little hands that they're holding bananas. I added those with foam tape, and then adhered a cluster to the bottom. And I made sure I had some extras left over to adhere on the inside so I can stamp the rest of my sentiment. So it says, you know, on the front it says, "Thanks Bunches," and on the inside, "For being my friend." And then I'm going to adhere the second vine to the inside of the card, and then the remaining little bananas. I decided to add a few leaves, and then I can add that one last little monkey there with a banana, and that's going to finish off card number 1. So I got that one, you know, out of the way, out of my head after doing just a bunch of die cutting to create my scene from solid cardstock. And then for my second card, I went in a completely different direction and decided to create a kind of a watercolor-y background. So I grabbed some Tim Holtz Distress watercolor paper and 2 different colors of Distress Oxide inks. I've got Twisted Citron and Lucky Clover. I thought those would look gorgeous just mixed together. So again, I'm experimenting. I wanted to create kind of a splattery watercolor background. So first I was sponging the colors onto this distress paper, and I have the smooth side facing up, and no rhyme or reason to it. I just kind of wanted it more in the upper corner. I'm still thinking like a tree backdrop, just, you know, something that these little monkeys are hanging from. So I sponged it first, and then I sprayed it insanely heavily with water. And I was liking how it was looking, and then before I even thought, because it's just force of habit, I picked it up with a paper towel and removed all the color. So I was like, oh great, now I need to like keep adding to this because I just basically ruined this. So I dried it first, and then I just grabbed my little Art Impressions plastic palette here. You could use anything non-porous, craft sheet, plastic plate, anything will work. But I just smushed those ink pads onto that palette and then added a bunch of water, and then I'm picking up with a really large paintbrush. This is a silver size 12, and I'm just like splattering the color, like adding a bunch of color, splattering it with my paintbrush, not being super neat with it because this was the look I was going for. So the sponging in the beginning was completely unnecessary. I could have skipped that step, but practice makes perfect, you know, hindsight as always. So I'm just adding the color, letting them mix, adding the splatter, you know, letting these oxide inks kind of do their thing, because with water they have just a completely different look to them. So added that, and then I completely dried it with my heat tool because I'm impatient. I didn't want to sit around and wait for it to dry. And then I did the exact same thing. I'm just adding like splatters instead of like larger amounts. I'm just adding large splatters of the ink over these layers, and added that as a layer. And then I'm going to do this again. I'm going to pick up the color and I'm going to like kind of splatter it, but this time I'm going to pick it up with a paper towel because it gives that awesome, you know, splatter effect, and it removes some of the color. And then I added some more splatter, and this time just let it sit on there and let it completely dry. So I've got this just really fun layer of splatters and colors, and I love how those colors mixed and created a whole nother shade of green. So I set that aside to completely dry. And then I die cut some Limelight cardstock with the Scripty Hello die. And one of them I just left in the scrap piece so that I could sponge the bottom with that same Lucky Clover Distress Oxide ink. Just kind of darken the bottom so it'll stand out just a little bit. And then the other two die cuts I got out of the scraps, like, and removed all the centers, and I'm going to stack all these together with that same Nouveau adhesive. So just a really thin line of that. I'm going to stack two of them together and then add another layer of thin adhesive and then stack that last one right on top of it. So once I have my sentiment stacked, the backdrop or the background was completely dry at this point. And I decided to stamp the sentiment directly onto that background with the same intense black ink. So I just inked that up, stamped it onto the background, and then I could adhere that sentiment right below it. So same thing, really thin amounts of this Nouveau adhesive. So applied that, flipped it over. I'm going to adhere that directly below the stamped sentiment, and then I can go to creating my scene. So I've got my sentiments in place. I'm going to add this little vine as if it's kind of hanging from the word hello. And same thing, I'm using that Derice foam tape and just cutting up little pieces of it. And then I can hang the little monkeys, you know, from this vine. And I can't resist hanging, you know, several of them together. That was my original thought as well, was doing maybe a tall card similar to that Neat and Tangled one I posted the other day. That would be really cute too, doing a really tall card and then having just a bunch of these little monkeys hanging as if it's, you know, that Barrel of Monkeys game. I'd mentioned that when I filmed the haul video using this set. That was the first thing that occurred to me. It'd be fun to do them in like really bright colors. So that's an idea for a future card. I don't know yet if I'll have the time to get to it. But adhered all my little monkeys, and then I had, of course, extra die cut leaves left over from all that stamping and die cutting I had done earlier. So I adhered those kind of around the sentiment as well. And then for the inside of the card, I had saved two of the monkeys and a vine because I wanted to adhere those to kind of tie it all together. So attached them together and then adhered those flat to the inside of the card with my Nouveau adhesive. And then I can stamp another sentiment from that same Love You Bunches set. So it says, "Let's hang out." Thought it was just rather apt with these specific ones. So I'm going to stamp that onto the inside of my card. And my card base is heavyweight white cardstock, cut to 4 1/4 by 11. Scored at 5 1/2, so it's a top folding A2 size card. And I never cut down this distress piece of watercolor paper, so it's the same size. It's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. So I just added a thin layer of that Nouveau adhesive all around the perimeter of the back and a bit down the center, so I can adhere that flat to my card. And that finishes off card number 2. So as always, there will be links below the video to my blog post. I'll have links to all of these supplies used. This specific set is limited edition. Ellen just is going to sell it until it's out of stock, and then it's gone for good. So check that out if you are interested. I will have links to everything and to my blog post in the description box below the video. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping and commenting on my videos. I appreciate it so very much, and I will see you all very soon in the next one. Bye!